Right, now the first wash we're going to produce on this piece of watercolour paper is called a flat wash, and you can see here that I've used the paper stretcher that I mentioned in the first DVD. We'll come back to that in a second. What we're going to use is a 1-inch flat brush like this, and we're going to fill this compartment here with quite a lot of ultramarine blue paint. And the way we do that is quite simply by getting a lot of water on the brush, clean water. I've added a little bit of blue to it so you can see it's a little bit easier, but essentially you should use clean water. And you can see how much water that big 1-inch brush is bringing over. Now we're going to mix the blue paint by adding that to the water so that it's thoroughly mixed and reasonably strong. Remember, as I've said before, watercolour dries 50% lighter than when it first goes on the paper, so always make something stronger than you think it's going to be. If it looks right when you first put it on the paper, it's probably going to dry too light. Right, I've got a scrap of watercolour paper here, so I'm going to just check to see what that looks like. That's not too bad. I'll just add a little bit more blue paint. It's always best to make too much paint rather than too little. There's nothing worse than a sky where you run out of paint halfway through it, because I guarantee the sky will be ruined, because either you won't mix the same shade of paint that you previously had, or while you're mixing it the first lot on the paper is drying off and you'll end up with a tide mark. Right, now I've got the paper on the drawing board, which is on that slight slope, so that the paint is going to run slowly down from top to bottom, and that will help us to keep a nice even smooth wash. And the secret of doing a flat wash is to keep the paint moving. I've loaded the brush up with a lot of blue paint, and all that you do is just start at the top of your paper. Just make sure you get everything covered like that, and then quickly, before it dries out, just go down the next stage, but picking up each time the bottom of the paint on the previous row. But you need to do this quickly to avoid tide marks. I'm filling all those speckles in just to show you the graded flat wash, but you can see that if you wanted to leave that, that's quite a nice effect, particularly if you're doing water or if you want to leave little flecks of light in the sky. But you can see, because the paper is on a slope, how the paint is running down the page quite nicely, and I don't have to worry about trying to join up the bands of paint, if you like. Let's go from that end just for a change, because the paint is doing that for me. And there's no effort at all. You notice I'm not going back over the paint that I've already painted. That would be a disaster once you start trying to go back into paint that started drying near the top. Okay, so as we get towards the bottom of the page, or the bottom of the piece of paper, let's just finish that off there. And there we have it. It's as easy as that. A nice flat wash, nice and smooth and even over a whole piece of paper. Remember, just by painting one stripe and then picking up the colour each time from the bottom of the previous stripe, so it runs down the paper. Simple as that. If you want to pick up the bottom of the paint that runs down, the excess paint, that little bead, you can either use a semi-dry brush, or as I'm doing, you can use a paper towel. You can see with ultramarine blue as well how it starts to granulate in the bumps and hollows of the watercolour paper, and that's a very nice effect that you can get with some papers. And there we go, a nice flat even wash right across the paper. Not difficult, is it?